So we've been doing a theme for the whole year. We've been doing a theme about Buddhism through time and space. So, but firstly, actually, if this is your first time coming to Sangha Night, it might be some people's first evening. So just welcome, really warm welcome to Tuesday night. It's great to see you here on a Tuesday. And what we've been doing over the past probably about 6 months, maybe longer, is we've been looking at Buddhism through time and space. And basically in the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at Buddhism as it arrived into China, when Buddhism arrived into China. And with each, what the aim of the theme is, as we're looking at Buddhism through its spread through different places and its development, we're looking always, what is the relevance for us? How can we learn from that, and how can we take lessons or practices from that for our current practice in this day and this age? But currently we're looking at the period of time, about the 7th century, and when Buddhism went from India into China, and how it changed, how it spread, and how that's impacted on how we practice the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha today. So we started that last week, but Daniel gave a talk last week just to introduce that and the figure of Chi-I and the White Lotus Sutra. And this evening I'll be telling the famous tale of Hsuan Tsang, a very famous Chinese Buddhist, very important Chinese Buddhist figure. And again, just looking at what we can learn from his story and his teachings. But yeah, just a kind of question to start with, a rhetorical question really, but what it is, why is the metaphor of the journey and the path used so often in Buddhism? Buddhism is sometimes referred to as a path, which gives the impression that we're moving from where we are now towards something, we're on a journey. So the metaphor of the journey and the path is often used for Buddhist practice. So why is that, and what is it that we're moving towards? I suppose that's the question to start off with. What is it that we're on a path towards, a journey towards? And for Buddhists, it's called the Three Jewels of Buddhism. So it's come on in, guys. There's a bit of Buddhist jargon which I've got written up on the flip chart, so we'll be able to see. And Buddhists use the term "going for refuge," and again, this term "going" implies a movement towards something, that we're moving towards something. And it says what we're moving towards is a refuge, which is an interesting kind of technical term that's used for what's valuable in Buddhism. But it's basically saying that all the time, Buddhism says all the time, we're looking for something to protect us. We're looking for something to give us protection from all the negative states we experience, the suffering we experience, and we look to all kinds of things in our life for protection from that. And a lot of the time, the things we look for, unfortunately, they don't work. They don't give us that protection. They don't give us that safety, that security. Things change, things break, things are unreliable. So we're looking for happiness and we're looking for security, but often we're just looking for it in the wrong places, in things that can't quite give us what we're looking for. And what the tradition of Buddhism says is actually what will give you that happiness, what will give you that satisfaction. In a sense, what will give you security is your own mind, working with your own mind and changing that and becoming who you really could be. The route to happiness and satisfaction is by fulfilling your potential, being the person that you could become. That's what Buddhism says will make you truly satisfied and happy. That's what will give you security and protection. That's what is a safe refuge. And that's represented for Buddhists. That's kind of symbolised by the figure of the Buddha. So as Buddhists, we revere, we respect the figure of the Buddha as a symbol of our potential. It represents the potential for us to change, to transform, to grow. So that's the first kind of refuge for Buddhists, is the Buddha refuge. And the Buddha represents for Buddhists this possibility to change, a possibility to become very radically different from who we are now, to become, to fulfill our potential as human beings. And that can look very different for different people. It could be, to start with, just to become a bit less stressed, a bit more calm, to become a bit happier. But it can range what that symbol can become for people. Can become quite a big vision of what is possible for a human being to become deeply compassionate, deeply wise, full of energy, very, very creative, an unlimited mind almost. An unlimited mind. So that's what the Buddha refuge symbolises. That's one of the things that in a way, that's what we're moving towards on the Buddhist path, is that vision of what's possible to become as a human being. That's the first of these jewels. And then the second one is the teachings of the Buddha, which we call the Dharma refuge, the Dharma jewel, the teachings of the Buddha. And yeah, in a sense, what Buddhism gives us is a very practical, step-by-step guide how to become who we could really become, how to become happier, how to fulfill our potential. And so the metaphor of a path fits very well. In a sense, it's like we're following a step-by-step path of how to become who we truly could be, how to become happier. And that's what's symbolised by the Dharma jewel, the Dharma refuge. But what Buddhism also recognises is that we can't do it on our own. We can't get there on our own, partly because we don't live separate. We've got this kind of idea that we exist closed off from other people, kind of separate from other people, and our actions aren't influenced by other people don't influence us. But actually the truth of it is we're deeply interconnected and interdependent on all life, really, the whole universe and all life. So we can't make it alone, we can't go it alone. And that's why the third jewel symbolises the community of like-minded people, which we call the Sangha. And in a sense, we rely on other people for support, for encouragement, and in a way to just unfold the teachings for us and to allow us to unfold, allow our potential to unfold. So that's the answer to that rhetorical question. Basically, what Buddhists are moving towards is our own potential, and that's the person we could become, and that's symbolised by the Buddha, and the path is symbolised by the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and the people who help and support us we call the Sangha. So, basically we're on a journey, we're on a path, a journey of transformation. And there's lots of symbols, there's lots of other ways, there's kind of lists and ways we describe the path. But one way is the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. And the people who've recently been, hopefully everybody here will be familiar with the Eightfold Path, but particularly the people who've recently done the intermediate course. We look at the Eightfold Path in terms of the path of vision and the path of transformation. So it starts off the Buddhist path, the Buddhist career, you could say, the Buddhist journey starts off with a vision of who we could become and a vision of what's possible. But for Buddhists, that's not enough. It's not enough to just be inspired or to admire the ideals or to admire the teachings or to admire the Buddha or famous Buddhists. That's not enough. What makes someone really treading the Buddhist path is to actually act on it, to try and move towards the ideal, to try and become more like it. And in a way, that's what makes Buddhism very radical, I suppose, compared to perhaps other religions and other philosophies. Buddhism's about trying to become like the ideal, trying to move towards it, trying to transform and become who you really could be. So it's not enough. It's not enough to admire and to respect and to like the Buddhist teachings or the Buddha. Actually, Buddhism is about changing, transforming your own mind, transforming your life in the light of that vision. So the metaphor of the journey and the path is central to Buddhism. You could say that's what being a Buddhist is being on that journey, being on that path of growth and of transformation and of discovery. That's what makes somebody a Buddhist, is that commitment to change, that commitment to becoming who they could be. So in a way, that's all by way of introduction to saying what we're going to be looking at tonight is a journey, a very particular journey, and a specific journey of a man called Hsuan Tsang. And Hsuan Tsang was a Chinese Buddhist, and he lived in the 7th century, about 620 in the Common Era or something like that. And a bit of background into Hsuan Tsang and kind of the era that he lived in. So Hsuan Tsang was born into quite a scholarly family. I think his father was a Confucianist, which is still a big religion in China, but was at the time as well. So Hsuan Tsang was brought up a Confucianist, and he was a very bright young man, a philosopher and a scholar, very interested in this. But his elder brother was a Buddhist monk. His elder brother became a Buddhist monk, and under his influence, Hsuan Tsang started to become interested in the teachings of Buddhism. I'm not sure of the exact timings, but it was quite recent that Buddhism will have come to China. Within a few hundred years, Buddhism would have arrived in China. And Vedanya set the scene last week that it's quite difficult for early Buddhists in China, because they had Very similar, well, Daniel said last week, a very similar culture to ours in some ways. They had an established culture, an established system of art and literature. And yeah, a very different religion was introduced, Buddhism was introduced to China, and it was very different to their culture. So for early Buddhists in China, there was perhaps a lot of confusion, a lot of contradiction. And Xuanzang, yeah, he became a Buddhist, but he very quickly actually became disillusioned. He became concerned that he could see contradictions in the teachings. The teachings didn't quite add up for him. They seemed like there was something missing from the teachings. These teachings were being introduced from India, from a very different culture, and they weren't quite landing right. They weren't quite making sense to Xuanzang. So, yeah, Xuanzang he wanted to do something about this. So he started to learn the original Indian languages of Sanskrit and Pali. He started to really study them. He wanted to really study the scriptures. But what it seemed was that the scriptures that he had access to in China weren't up to scratch. They weren't up to scratch. There was something missing with them over the years. They'd become slightly distorted, and there was just a lot of confusion around at the time. And so it started to become apparent to Xuanzang that he needed to do something. He needed to do something about this. And what he decided he would need to do was actually to go on a journey to India, which was where the Buddhist teachings originated from, and was still thriving. At the time, Buddhism was still very much thriving in India. India was like still very much the capital of Buddhism. There was just a very, very rich, thriving culture of Buddhism, practice of Buddhism in India. So Xuanzang decided that what he needed to do, what somebody needed to do, and it was going to have to be him, was going to go all the way to India, to travel to India, find teachings from somebody who really knew what the teachings were all about, and then bring them back to China and translate them for the Chinese people, for the benefit of the Chinese people. So yeah, he went on, he embarked on a very, very famous pilgrimage, a very famous journey, and he wrote an account of his journey, and that account became really useful in the present day. Actually, 100 years ago, archaeologists used the account of his journey to discover and locate the famous Buddhist sites and to excavate them. So we owe a lot to Xuanzang. I'll talk more about that later. But his journey also inspired other tales. There was a book that was written a few hundred years later called Journey to the West, about Xuanzang, and it was under the guise of a monk called Tipitaka. His name was changed to Tipitaka, but it was based on the story of Xuanzang, and it also inspired the TV series Monkey. So some people may be familiar with the TV series Monkey. This was based on the story Journey to the West, which was again based on the story of Xuanzang. So Xuanzang was a very, very famous pilgrim. We'll find out a bit why, but this is a picture of a statue of Xuanzang, which is in India at the moment. He's become a very revered, very important figure from Buddhist history. And this is he's basically got his backpack and his lamp with him. He's on a journey. He's on a mission. He's on a quest. And I've got a little Xuanzang, a mini Xuanzang, which my professor brought back from India for me. So I've got him keeping me company on the stage. So yeah, so back to the story. So Xuanzang wanted to go to India, but there was a problem because the Emperor of China had said nobody was allowed to leave the country. There was lots of conflict and war happening at the time, and the Emperor of China basically said nobody's allowed to leave. Well, basically there's these set of gates called the Jade Gates, and they're the border of China. Nobody's allowed to go out of them. Nobody's allowed to come in or out of China. And this was quite a problem for Xuanzang because he wanted to get out of China and go to India. So he went through the kind of right methods. He applied for a permit, for a visa to go to India, and it was turned down. He was told, basically no uncertain terms, you're not going to leave China. So this put Xuanzang in a very difficult position because he knew the importance of the Dharma. He could really see the importance of the teachings of the Buddha and how it could change people's lives. And he needed to have, because he needed to have the true teachings because he really wanted to help people and change people's lives. But to do so, we're going to really put his life in danger. So he had a real decision to make. But you could see, well, in a way, this was going to be more important than his own life, in a way. And it's going to be more important than this particular emperor at this particular time. The future of Buddhism in China might be depending on this. So he decided to sneak out of China. So he bought himself a horse, and he got his provisions, his kind of provisions ready to go on this journey. And he basically travelled by stealth. He kind of slept during the day, and at night he kind of snuck through the shadows and got closer and closer towards the Jade Gates, towards the border of China. And after a few weeks of doing this, he reached the Jade Gates, which were the kind of the border of the territory of China. And he had a big decision to make at this point. He had a real, in a way, life-changing decision, because there was a lot of consequences. If he went through those Jade Gates, he would basically become an outlaw, and his life would be in danger. His life would be in danger if he was ever caught. And also, going to India in those days wasn't straightforward. The journey would be very, very perilous. He'd be crossing, basically 10,000 miles of desert and mountainous regions to get to India. It wasn't just, you couldn't just hop on an EasyJet flight over to India or whatever it would be. It'd be like a 12-hour flight. It was a 10,000 mile trek across deserts and mountainous regions. So basically, Xuanzang was faced with this decision: was he going to go ahead with it? Was he going to go through these Jade Gates? Was he going to go ahead with this quest, or should he basically he had the opportunity to go back to a monastery, live quite a comfortable life, learn about the Dharma, have quite an easy life? And basically Xuanzang's resolve was unbreakable. He decided, in fact he made a vow at the Jade Gates, and he said, I'm not going to turn my back on India, I'm not going to turn back towards China and the Jade Gates until I found the true Dharma, so I can bring it back. So he made this vow that he wasn't going to turn back, he wasn't going to turn back to face the Jade Gates. So he was really, really determined. And here's a map of the route that they went along. And it's quite an inspiring story for me, because a group of us went on a pilgrimage to India about 3 years ago, and there'll be another group going in February. I think there's still an opportunity to join that group if people want to. And I found that difficult. We went for 3 weeks, and compared to Xuanzang, we lived in real luxury. I can see some people who went on their pilgrimage chuckling, because it wasn't an easy experience. It was difficult. There was illness. I lost a lot of weight, got ill. I found the conditions difficult, the accommodation and the travel difficult. I found the uncertainty of the journey difficult, the intensity of being in India difficult. We were there for 3 weeks. It took Xuanzang 16 years to get to India and back again, and he travelled 10,000 miles across deserts on horseback and barefoot. So it kind of puts our difficulties into scale, into perspective, I suppose, really, the extent of the journey that Xuanzang undertook. So this is the route, and he set off across the Gobi Desert on his horse with a guide. But disaster struck quite soon. Actually, he ran into trouble quite quickly, because it turned out that the horse that he'd bought, in good faith, turned out not to be fit for purpose. He'd been swindled. He'd been sold basically a bit of a crippled horse, a bit of a mangy old horse, and he could see this horse wasn't going to get him across any desert. It wasn't going to get him across any mountainous region. So he was in a bit of trouble. So it started off badly, and then it got worse, unfortunately, for Xuanzang, because the guide he'd hired tried to murder him in his sleep. I'm not sure, it's not to give the details why. It could be because there's perhaps a ransom for Xuanzang, because he was a fugitive and outlaw. But Xuanzang managed just to wake in the nick of time and flee and run away from on his mangy horse from the guide and escape. So now he was alone. He didn't have a guide. He was in the desert and he didn't have a guide. And then what happened next, you can probably guess. He got lost. He got lost in the desert with his horse without a guide. And his position seemed really, really desperate, actually. And he was starting to run out of provisions and run out of food. And he was becoming very, very tired, very weak. And he got off his horse to drink little bit of what was left of his water bottle, and he dropped his water bottle. And his water just started to kind of drain away into the sand. So as soon as he got started, then it was looking like his quest was over, his quest was ended. But Xuanzang was still resolute. He made his vow, and he said, I'm not going to turn back for help. I'd rather die. I'd sooner die facing India with my back to the Jade Gates than turn back and try and give up on my quest. So basically, he kind of started to stagger towards what he thought the direction of India would be. But he collapsed. He collapsed and passed out. But what seems to have happened is that at this point, the legends and the stories say that something intervened. You could say that the universe intervened for Xuanzang, it seemed, or something happened, something very fortuitous happened. Xuanzang, was coming in and out of consciousness. He had a vision of a Buddhist figure called Avalokiteshvara, which is the Buddha of compassion. And he woke with a start and saw his horse running away. So he got a bit of energy and chased after his horse, saying, come back. But he followed the horse, and the horse was running towards an oasis in the desert. So Xuanzang was saved. His horse, mangy old mare, led him in the direction of an oasis. So, disaster turned into, he escaped death, and Xuanzang got the provisions he needed. He got nourishment. He was saved. It was okay. So he made it to this oasis. And so things got better for Xuanzang after that. It was a bad start, but things got a lot better after that. And from the oasis, he managed to get the provisions, the things he needed, and he set off to the next place. And the first major place he reached was a place called Turfan, and it's called Turpan on this map. And so Xuanzang reached Turfan, and he made quite a name for himself there. There was a king of the region, the king of Turfan, became a big fan of Xuanzang. He'd heard about this kind of crazy traveller who'd left China on this perilous journey, and he asked for teachings, and he became impressed by Xuanzang's knowledge of Buddhism, and he laid on feasts and banquets for Xuanzang. He looked after him, he gave him accommodation, and basically he made Xuanzang an offer. He said, look, I forget this idea, this crazy idea of going all the way to India. Why don't you just stay here, and you can teach us here about Buddhism? Why don't you just stay here and teach us about Buddhism? But Xuanzang refused. He made his vow, he'd made his commitment, and he refused to go back. And he basically went on hunger strike. He said, let me leave, let me go, because the king didn't want him to continue on his journey, and Xuanzang went on hunger strike. That's how determined he was to carry on. So the king again was impressed. He was impressed by his resolve, by his commitment, and he let him continue. But also he gave Xuanzang things that he would need. He gave him gold, lots of gold that he could use to buy provisions. He gave him servants, and he gave him letters of introduction so he could basically find a comfortable passage throughout all the other regions. So this was very, very good for Xuanzang. He was now in a position where he had everything that he needed. He had the backing he needed, the money, he had servants, letters of introduction. So basically similar things happened actually. He passed through village after village, and he arrived in kind of what's modern day Afghanistan and Pakistan. After maybe a few more years, it took him a few more years to get this far, but he was gradually getting a bit of a reputation for himself, this crazy Chinese guy who's trying to get all the way to India on horseback to get the teachings of the Buddha. And people became deeply impressed by his resolve and his commitment, but also by his knowledge of Buddhism and his ability to teach Buddhism. So a similar thing happened. He arrived in I think the north of India. There was I think the emperor was called Harsha. And India at the time was split into lots of different kind of kingdoms and regions. And the emperor of the north part of India was called Harsha. And when Xuanzang arrived, his reputation had become so great that the emperor kissed the feet of Xuanzang because he thought this must be a great person, a great man who's achieved this, who's doing this, and has this resolve. And the emperor, he kind of laid on lots of feasts. He also organised a massive debate, a huge debate. He got all the kind of, India was full of great religious teachers, and he invited all these religious teachers to have a debate, basically, a bit of a kind of a, I can't think, I'm going to say like a standoff, not a standoff or a dance-off, but kind of a teach-off, kind of do see who was the best teacher of Buddhism. And Xuanzang won. He became renowned as the best teacher of Buddhism at the north of India. So basically the story continued, and there was more disasters. There was kind of ups and downs, twists and turns. At one time, he was just about to get to India, and he got attacked by bandits. His boat got attacked by bandits, and he escaped that one. The story is a very colourful story. Basically, lots of ups and downs. Lots and lots of disasters, lots and lots of kind of triumphs. But all the way, the kind of continuous thing throughout the story, and this kind of part of the story is Xuanzang's resolve, actually, his determination, the vow that he'd made, and not deviating from whether he'd had difficult circumstances or very, very good circumstances. It didn't matter to Xuanzang. He was just determined to keep on his quest, to stick on the quest. Time for some pictures. Because we went to some of the places that Hsuan Tsang visited. Hsuan Tsang arrived in India, and he visited all the famous places associated with the life of the Buddha. And at the time, they were still thriving. Buddhism was thriving in India. So these were humming with Buddhists, with practice, with lots of monks, lots of tourists, lots of pilgrims at these places. But basically, Buddhism died out in India, and it was only because Hsuan Tsang kept such details, kind of information about the location of these places, that archaeologists were able to find the precise locations of all these ruined sites and excavate them. So it meant that Buddhists like us could go and pay homage and visit these places because of Hsuan Tsang, actually. So this is us. Actually, this is the map of the places we went to on pilgrimage in northern India. So there was Sarnath at the bottom, which is kind of in the middle of the picture, which is where the Buddha first taught the Dharma. And then up at the top, Savatthi, which was where the Buddha hung out and kind of spent about 20 years just teaching, giving lots of very, very famous teachings. We went to Lumbini and Xuanzang, where the Buddha was born and died. And we went to Bodh Gaya, where basically it all happened, where the Buddha became the Buddha, where he was enlightened, the place where he sat underneath the Bodhi tree and became fully awakened, fully enlightened. Here's a picture of us at Sarnath in our pilgrimage outfits. There's this huge, a lot of the places, there's these huge brick-built stupas just to commemorate the important places of Buddhism. But when Hsuan Tsang visited them, they would look very, very different, full of people, full of kind of monastic buildings. But we went to places, basically, some places are just piles of bricks, actually. And it was kind of, what's this pile of bricks? But this was the pile of bricks where the Buddha was grown up or been born or something. There's some of the places are just piles of bricks, but other than that, there's these kind of quite big monuments still surviving. So this was where Sarnath, where the Buddha first taught the Dharma, the teachings of Buddhism. These were our two kind of spiritual leaders, Nogavangsa and Manidharma, who was the tour leader along with Maitradasa, at the top of Vulture's Peak. And Vulture's Peak was, again, a famous place from the time of the Buddha where a lot of famous teachings were given, and this was us at the top of Vulture's Peak. One of the things I found, one of the annoyances of pilgrimage, the difficulties, which kind of minor compared to Hsuan Tsang's difficulty, was just the number of people, actually. There's just huge swathes of Buddhists from different traditions. There's, these were, I think, Burmese, probably Burmese monks, and Sri Lankan Buddhists as well seemed to be everywhere. Everywhere was you couldn't basically sit down for Sri Lankan Buddhists. Sri Lankan Buddhists everywhere, and all the different Buddhists had loudspeakers trying to kind of out-chant the other Buddhists. Sometimes you turned up in these places and there were just kind of seas of noise and different Buddhists, and it's actually just it was a sea of reverence and devotion. And Nogavangsa kind of used that metaphor, which was really helpful. Just basically, this sea of noise was just a sea of Buddhist devotion from all kinds of different cultures and places. This was one of us in Shraddha, where the Buddha spent most of his teaching time, actually. And then we arrived at Bodh Gaya, and a bit dishevelled, actually, and quite ill, some of us, and dishevelled. But this was the place where Buddhism all started. This was the source of Buddhism, the heart of Buddhism, where the Buddha gained enlightenment, where the tree the Buddha sat underneath, the famous Bodhi tree, to become enlightened, to become the Buddha. This was the climax of our pilgrimage, and this was just shortly after we arrived, with the tree in the background, performing a ritual of Buddhist puja. And it was all thanks to Hsuan Tsang. We wouldn't have been able to do any of that if Hsuan Tsang hadn't have been to these places and just documented them so well. So we owed a lot to Hsuan Tsang for that journey. But it said that Hsuan Tsang followed in these, we followed in Hsuan Tsang's footsteps. He didn't follow in our footsteps. But when he arrived at Bodh Gaya, it said that Hsuan Tsang wept. He'd been travelling for years and years to get to the heart of Buddhism, to the source of Buddhism, and he finally had arrived, finally had made it to where the Buddha first became the Buddha, and he wept. And he wept, it said he wept because of his own shortcomings. He felt that he had such a long way to go to try and emulate the Buddha, to become like the Buddha. So he wept because of his own shortcomings. Not quite sure what the next picture is. That will come back to that. So where are we? So the story of Xuanzang. Yeah, so the last place that Hsuan Tsang went to was, there's a great monastic university called Nalanda University. And this was the place he really wanted to go to, actually, because what he wanted to do was to receive the teaching from the best teachers. He wanted to find out what the true meaning of Buddhism was, the true secrets of Buddhism from the best teachers. And at the time, India was thriving and had been for about 1,000 years. Buddhism had been thriving in India for about 1,000 years. And there's a great university where Buddhism was taught called Nalanda. And it said there was about 20,000 really high-ranking scholars and monks that were at this university, just basically full-time learning about practicing, teaching Buddhism. And again, Hsuan Tsang made a real impression with these monks at Nalanda. This is a picture of one of our high-ranking, esteemed teachers at Nalanda. And this is what's left of Nalanda. You can kind of see from going there in the ruins of it how vast it must have been, just this kind of vast network of libraries and practice halls, and basically 20,000 people just studying Buddhism all the time. And he struck up a friendship with the abbot, the kind of leader of Nalanda, Sila Bhadra, and he was 106 years old apparently, so he was steeped in Buddhism as just the person that Hsuan Tsang needed to hand over, to pass on the teachings of the Dharma. So Hsuan Tsang had completed an amazing first part of his journey. He'd gone to India, he'd arrived, he'd got the teachings he needed, and he'd made quite a name for himself, quite a reputation for himself. And he was sent back basically with a bit of a hero's kind of cavalry. He was sent back with a procession of elephants to carry all the texts. He took loads and loads of texts back with him to China. And he was given all the provisions he needed to make a safe passage back. So his journey back was a lot smoother than his journey there. But all in all, it took him 16 years to go to India, to get the true teachings that he wanted and to bring them back to China. So quite a journey. That's the journey again, 10,000 miles there and back. And one final anecdote to the story was when he got back to China. He wasn't an outlaw, but he was a hero. His story had reached all the way back to China, presumably on the Silk Route with all the traders, and he'd become a hero. And he had a hero's welcome. There's a procession in the streets for him to welcome him back. And the king asked him to become one of his advisors. He said, could Hsuan Tsang become one of the king's advisors? And Hsuan Tsang said it would be like taking a boat out of water to dry land to make him join the government and lead the Buddhist life. So he said, again, he kept resolute to his quest, because his quest actually wasn't just to get back to China. His quest was to translate the texts into a language and a form that his people could access and use. And it said the rest of his life he translated 73 really important Buddhist texts from Indian into Chinese. And it's quite a feat, a massive feat, considering the toll it must have taken on him, that journey to China and back again. And another twist in the tale was the real huge importance of what he did, because shortly after he left India, the Indian Empire as it was collapsed. Emperor Harsha died, his empire collapsed, and Buddhism started to become under threat and to die out in India. And shortly after there was an invasion, a couple of hundred years later, an invasion of Muslim attackers, and they basically wiped out all the monasteries, destroyed all the monasteries, the rupas, the monks, the texts. But basically Buddhism was destroyed in India. And Hsuan Tsang, just in the nick of time, taken 73 valuable texts and learnt them, translated them so that they could be preserved. They were preserved for basically for us, for the people of the future to access and to practice. So we owe a huge debt to the life of Sangharakshita and his commitment, his pilgrimage, his quest. So he's he's a big hero for me. He's a big spiritual hero, somebody who I think we owe a great debt to. But I'll just have a sip of water. Yeah, so he's a very courageous and brave man, an important man, and it's a nice story. But what in a sense, it's not just what can we learn from that. What is it that we can take? Because it's a nice story, but there's lots of nice stories that we could tell. What is it we can learn? What can we tell, or what can we take from the example of Xuanzang or the life of Xuanzang? And well, I think going back to what I draw out from this story is going back to the metaphor of the journey, the spiritual life being a journey, and what we can learn from Hsuan Tsang's attitude and approach to his spiritual journey, his spiritual quest. And yeah, there's a useful Buddhist list. There's lots of Buddhist lists, but there's a useful Buddhist list called the worldly winds, the eight worldly winds. So some of you will be able to see the flip chart, some of you won't. So I'll just describe what they are. So there's a list of four pairs of kind of things that can happen to you in a way, and they're called the worldly winds. And it's said that these worldly winds blow us around in our day-to-day life. So there's four pairs, and the pairs are gain on one hand, gaining things, getting things, receiving things, so gain, and on the other hand, loss, losing things. And it said that each of these pairs is something we're blown towards and something we're kind of blown away from. So in our day-to-day life, we're blown towards gain, getting things, and we don't like it when we lose things. We're kind of blown away from losing things. We don't like that. The second worldly winds is pleasure and pain. So yeah, we really want pleasure. We kind of chase after pleasure. We get blown around after pleasure, and we're trying to avoid pain. We don't want to experience any pain, so we get kind of blown around by this worldly wind of pleasure and pain. The third one is, and the third and fourth are quite closely connected. There's praise and blame. We basically want people to like us. We want people to think well of us, to approve of us, and we don't want to get blamed for things. We don't want to get in trouble. And and lastly, connected with that, we want to be important. We want to have kind of, we want to be someone who's important. We want to matter. We want to have a status. We don't want to be somebody who isn't important. We don't want a kind of a lack of status. So, and I think the Hsuan Tsang story is a really good example of somebody who isn't blown around by these worldly winds. There's lots of situations, lots of examples in Hsuan Tsang's story of basically disaster, of kind of loss, pain. To start with, blame, potential blame and lack of status, this decision to go against convention, to go against the orders of an emperor, a mighty emperor, because basically what he was about was much bigger than that. He was about something much bigger than that. So he wasn't going to be determined by whether his name was going to be good or whether he was going to get blamed. He was about something. His quest was much bigger than, much more important than that. And then he experienced loads of loss, loads of discomfort. And it would have been easy for Hsuan Tsang to give up or to kind of turn back or to kind of just be put off by the level of discomfort and loss. Just a painful experience he came into. But again, he was determined. He was determined to hit his quest, to achieve his quest. And then it turned around for Hsuan Tsang. He experienced loads of pleasure. He became very, very famous. He became very, very. He was offered loads of wealth and status. Actually, various kings and rulers said, "Be my advisor, stay here, don't go on this quest." So it must have been very, very tempting for Hsuan Tsang just to think, well, yeah, why don't I? Why bother going to India? That seems a bit daft. Why don't I just sit here? I can teach these people. That must be quite a lot of benefit. I can teach these people in this town, this city. I could give them the benefit of the teachings. But he knew he knew his quest was much bigger, much more important than that. He knew, in a sense, a scale. He had a sense of the scale of the importance of what he was about. What depended on it. The importance of him getting the true Dharma, the true teachings of the Buddha, and bringing them back to China so people could benefit. And he knew how important that was, and he wasn't going to be blown around by these worldly winds. So, there's examples from Hsuan Tsang's story, but I imagine most of us might experience these kind of worldly winds blowing us around just in a day-to-day life. They're quite big examples. I don't suppose many of us are going to be going in a desert on horseback on our own and lose our water. It's not likely to happen to us. But the kind of things that might blow us around might be, there's kind of decisions around the spiritual life we've undertaken. So a daily decision might be, well, should I meditate? Should I meditate this morning, or should I stay in bed? This is a kind of decision that I face each morning. Should I meditate this morning, or should I stay in bed? My bed's quite comfortable, and it's quite pleasurable. And getting out of bed would mean, losing the loss of that pleasure, the kind of painful experience having to get out of bed. So should I get up and meditate? Should I stay in bed? Should I go to the Buddhist Centre? I mean, this is a decision I would make now, but for other people, because I work here, it's part of my commitment, my role to come here. But for other people, might think, well, should I come to the Buddhist Centre, or should I watch something? There's something good on TV tonight, the Champions League semi-final. Should I watch the Champions League semi-final? Should I come to Sangha Night? Should I come to the Buddhist Centre? Should I go on retreat? It might, should I go on a Buddhist retreat? I'm getting into this Buddhism. I'm enjoying my time, my visits at the Buddhist Centre. Well, should I go on retreat, or I could use the money for something else? I could go on a really nice holiday. I could get that extension to my house. What should I use my money for? There's all these. In a sense, we've got this. We've undertaken to whatever degree we have to go on this journey, this path, to whatever extent we have. And all the time there's going to be temptations, there's going to be things that are just swaying us either way, it might blow us off course. And it'd be very easy for us just to to forget about Buddhism, just to get blown off course. That's the kind of thing we're encountering each day. You could say moment by moment on the Buddhist path is the worldly winds kind of blowing us around. And that decision, moment by moment, to stay to our quest, to what we're about, to our ideals, our value. To become, if we're about becoming the person we could be. So that's if we decided we want to fulfil our potential, what's going to help me to fulfil my potential? Is it going to be to go and meditate, or is it going to be to stay in bed? Is it going to be to go to this class at the Buddhist Centre, or to watch what's on the TV? So we're kind of faced, it's not on the scale of Hsuan Tsang, where should I accept this wealth and this offer. But it could be, sometimes we might get, that offer of, sometimes, you see people just get distracted by things, and, they're really convinced they're going to become enlightened even, or, they're going to really transform their lives, and then just something comes up and they just get distracted or blown off course, and then come back a few years later and remember that this is what they thought they wanted to do. And, it's quite common, and where, it's a useful... I suppose it's a useful tool to maybe talk about in groups even more. Kind of, do we experience ourselves being blown off course sometimes by these worldly winds? But why? Well, why was Xuanzang able to stay on his course? Why was Xuanzang able to stick and not deviate from his path? What was it that enabled Xuanzang to stick at his quest? Because it's quite a remarkable story. Some of the episodes and the adventures of Xuanzang, but what seemed to be continuous throughout it was his resolve, his ability to stay on his quest. And so the question arises for me: well, what is it? What is it that? Because surely it'd be really useful for us if we could have some of what Xuanzang had, if we could kind of bottle what Xuanzang had and have some for ourselves. That would be really, really useful. And the secret is this Buddhist word called Shraddha. What Xuanzang had in bucket loads was this quality called Shraddha, and it's spelled S-R-A-D-D-H-A, Shraddha. And it's one of these Buddhist words that it's very difficult to translate into an English word because there isn't really an English equivalent for it. So it's a bit like when we introduce the word metta. When we do the metta bhavana meditation, there isn't really an English word that translates to metta. So we use words like friendliness, kindness, love, but they're not quite the same as metta. And it's exactly the same for this word Shraddha. It's a Buddhist term, an Indian Buddhist term, but there isn't a direct English translation for it. Sometimes it's translated as faith, but it's a bit misleading in English because faith means something very different, or can mean something very different to Shraddha. Faith can mean kind of, in other religions, a kind of blind faith, a kind of belief in a god or a deity or someone that's going to save you. And Buddhism doesn't have a creator god or a deity, so we're not putting our trust or our faith in anybody to do it for us. We're not depending on other people to save us. It's very different in Buddhism, where we're taking responsibility for our own salvation. That's what the Buddhist path involves, is taking responsibility for our own salvation, our own state of mind, our own future. So faith isn't really an ideal translation for Shraddha. Sometimes it's called confidence or trust, or confidence trust. Sometimes they're put together. And again, it's not an ideal translation. But basically, what Sangha Night, who's the founder of our movement, what he attempts to translate Shraddha as is what's ultimate in us resonating with what's ultimate in the universe. So I'll say that again. What's ultimate in us resonating with what's ultimate in the universe. So I'll try and unpack that a bit. But you could say, basically that there's something in us that responds to beauty and truth and wisdom or ethical behaviour. There's something in us, there's almost like a capacity that we've got, a faculty that resonates, that will respond when we come across something that's beautiful or true or valuable, that's something that's got real meaning. And I'm sure we've all experienced, well, I know everybody here has had an experience of Shraddha, because we've all chosen to come here instead of doing something else, instead of watching the Champions League or watching Coronation Street or enjoying the summer's evening that's out there. So Shraddha is when what's highest in us, what's best in us, resonates with what's best in the universe. It's something. It's almost like something in our heartstrings is tugged, and we respond. We respond when we come across what's highest. And you could say it's like Shraddha is like our compass. It's like our sat-nav. Shraddha is what keeps us on track. It's what keeps us knowing we're going in the right direction. It's this capacity to know which direction our quest is, and not to get waylaid, not to get blown about, because we've got a sense of what's valuable, what's most important to us. Shraddha is that capacity. It's almost like a muscle that we've got, a faculty. Another way of describing Shraddha is as though it's the voice of our higher self, the voice of our better self, kind of calling to us, telling us which direction we need to go in, which direction to travel in. It's almost like there's a bit which is the highest in us, the best in us, a bit in us which knows actually what's true, knows what's beautiful. And often that voice just gets drowned out. It gets drowned out by all the busyness, all the noise, all the distractions in our life. By the worldly winds, by getting pleasure, getting status, by wanting people to like us. And that voice that can be speaking to us, the voice of wisdom that just says, well, this way, come this way. This is the way, this is what's going to make you happy. This is what's true, this is what you really need. This is what's going to really make you happy. Often that voice just gets drowned out by just the noise and the busyness of life. But we can learn to listen. We can learn to listen to that voice and to hear it and to act on it. And we can also create the conditions where it speaks more loudly and we can hear it more strongly. So that's perhaps another way of looking at Shraddha, this kind of capacity. It's almost like a voice, our inner voice of wisdom, our kind of higher self, just telling us, what's really best for us, what's really best for us. So there's three aspects to Shraddha, and just to try and unpack again what this means, because it's crucial. Because if this is what fueled Hsuan Tsang's journey, we need to get some of this. We need to get some of this kind of momentum, some of this energy for us to, in a way, to achieve anything in life. But particularly for the spiritual quest, we need Shraddha. So the first part of Shraddha is described as conviction. It's described as a knowing. It's almost, I would describe it as a kind of gut knowing. It's a deep conviction. It's a sense that we know something's true. We just know something's true. It can be quite intuitive, actually. Often it's quite intuitive for me. We just know something's true. It's a knowing. And for me, when I first came across the teachings of the Buddha and first came to the Buddhist Centre, that's the experience I had. Actually, it was quite an intuitive response of, this is for me. This is for me. This is true. This is valuable. There's almost like a familiarity. It's almost like someone was pointing out to me stuff that, in a way, I kind of knew but I'd forgotten. It's almost like, and at the time of the Buddha, people, when they encountered the Buddha, one of the things they would say is as though someone's uncovered something that had been covered up, and it felt a bit like that for me. It's almost like somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I knew this stuff already, but it was just being uncovered. Somebody was pointing it out to me, and there's a familiarity about it, in a sense. It just made a kind of common sense. It just seemed to make sense to me. So there was an intuitive response to the teachings of the Buddha, and also a kind of intuitive response to Buddhist ethics. A sense of, this is how to be happy. This is how to live a good life. How to become happier. And the wisdom teachings I heard about Buddhism made sense as well, impermanence, interconnectedness. So there was a sense of familiarity and a kind of an intuitive response, a conviction. This is true. But it's important to stress as well that we can't just go on intuition alone. We can't just go on our gut feeling of what seems right or what seems true to us. We can't rely on that alone. So again, Sangha Night, who's the founder of this movement, he said, well, Shraddha is intuition. Part of it is intuition, but it's grounded in reason. It needs to make sense. We need to test out the teachings of the Buddha for ourselves, rationally, just put them to the test. Does this really make sense? You know, are things impermanent? Is everything impermanent? You know, is that true? Are things unsatisfactory? You know, does craving really make me unhappy? You know, just to really kind of test out if these teachings make sense. And then the second part or the third part of it is our experience, our own experience. We can test the teachings of the Buddha in our own experience. You know, do they work? And it's really pleasing actually last week to be in the group with the people who recently joined Sangha Night. People just saying, well, actually this works. I've tried this, and it works, and that's why I keep coming, because it works. And it's really refreshing for me to hear that after so many years, because well, that's been my experience as well. Like basically, you know, the teachings of the Buddha work. They make sense. They intuitively seem right, and they work. You know, they made me a lot happier, and I've changed a lot. I've changed a lot since I first came on. So yeah, so against that kind of, you know, that deepens our confidence. The more we test out the teachings, and the more we test them out in our experience, the more that can deepen our conviction, that can deepen our sense of this is the right direction. So that voice, that kind of intuitive voice that senses the right direction, becomes stronger, becomes deeper, more powerful the more we kind of test it out and kind of keep testing it out in our experience. Does this make sense? You know, does this work? So that's the first part of it, is a kind of knowing, a conviction. But then the second part of Shraddha, this experience of Shraddha, is a real clarity of mind, a real kind of, it's described as a lucidity. And a metaphor that's used is of muddy water. It's almost like, and this really resonates with me, it's almost like my mind a lot of the time is like muddy water. It's just not very clear. There's just lots of distractions, lots of stuff going on, and just things aren't very clear. I've experienced times in my life where it's been crystal clear, just everything's been really crystal clear. What's been most important, what's most valuable, just suddenly becomes very, very clear. Priorities become very, very clear. A friend of mine actually, I haven't asked him if I can talk about this, but so I won't say who he is, but a friend of mine, reached a decision yesterday to take a really big step in his Buddhist journey, and to decide he wanted to join the order and to be ordained as a Buddhist. And it was just really refreshing to see him so clear. Actually, it was just really clear what he was saying. He's speaking very eloquently, and just his mind was very clear to him what he needed to do and what was important. So, in a sense, we can have, we can have that sense of recognition and conviction of it being true, but also we can trust that sense. We can enjoy that experience of a kind of a clarity, and there can be real joy with that experience, a real pleasure with that experience. I remember a couple of examples. One was when I took the decision we have these ceremonies in our tradition called Mitra ceremonies, and in a few weeks' time there will be some people making the step to formally become a Buddhist publicly, to make that kind of decision, that level of commitment to say they want to become a Buddhist. And they're very, very positive celebrations, very positive situations. And for me, I can still remember that night, the night when I kind of made that formal commitment to say that I am a Buddhist. I consider myself to be a Buddhist. And just there's a real sense of joy, but also a real sense of clarity, a real sense of lucidity. It was really important. It was really clear to me that I was doing exactly the right thing. There was just no conflicts, no doubts. This was exactly the right thing. I was in exactly the right place. And there's just real joy about that, just real kind of clarity of mind. And then the second experience that springs to mind as well is just around my ordination. So I was about 3 years ago now, I was ordained as a Buddhist and given the name Bodhinaga. And again, it was just a time of really strong Shraddha for me, a real strong experience of Shraddha. I was just really in touch with knowing that these teachings were true, and knowing that they were, how effective and how important they were. But also there's just a real clarity, a real kind of clarity in my mind. There's no conflicts, there's no doubts. It's just a sense, I'm doing exactly the right thing with my life. I'm in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. So there's a real sense of rightness about it, and clarity, lucidity. So these are all, these are two aspects of Shraddha, but they're not the most important actually. The most important aspect of Shraddha is it's a volitional, what we describe as a volitional aspect. It's sometimes called a longing, but it's almost like going back to right the way start what I was talking about in this talk. It's not enough just to admire and to respect and to kind of to be inspired. Even it's not enough to be inspired. What we need to do is to act. We need to to becoming a Buddhist, or being a Buddhist, or at whatever level, means actually doing something. It means trying out the teachings. It means doing the meditations. It means we need to act. So the most important part of Shraddha for me, and for Xuanzang, I would say as well, is this longing part. Xuanzang had this really clear and deep longing to get to India. He wasn't going to be swayed. He wasn't going to be put off. His heart was set on it. Maybe that's a good way of describing it. His heart was set on it. His heart was set on arriving at India and getting the true Dharma. And in a way, nothing would sway him. Nothing was going to put him off course. And that kind of state of mind is a very, very powerful. If you've got that level, if you've got a really strong commitment to get out of bed and meditate, you're going to do it. If you really want it, you're going to do it. If you've got that drive to really know how important it is and what the benefits are, then you'll do it. You'll prioritise it ahead of having a lie-in, or ahead of watching Coronation Street or the Champions League. So that part of Shraddha. Well, there's the part of Shraddha. There's a part of Shraddha that knows it's important. There's a part of Shraddha that's just got a kind of clarity of what's important and priorities. But the most important part is the bit that makes us want to act, the bit that makes us want to move towards it, to kind of close the gap. Yeah, to close the gap between us and what we could be, us and our potential, to kind of become the person we could be. So for me, the most touching part, the most important part of Xuanzang's story is the part around the Jade Gates, when he first gets to the Jade Gates, when he's just setting out on his journey. So he's, in a sense, he knows the consequences. He knows that if he's going to go forward, if he takes a step forward out of the Jade Gates, it's going to really affect his life. He's going to be putting himself in danger. He's going to be putting himself in peril. Also, he's just got quite a comfortable life. He could have quite a comfortable life, just going back, living in a monastery, practicing, in quite a safe environment. But he knows that, basically he's faced with kind of a situation where going outside of his comfort zone. He knows the dangers, he knows the perils, and he's standing on a threshold. He's standing on a boundary and a threshold, and he knows if he goes beyond this point, his life's going to change, and he's leaving behind comfort, he's leaving behind security, and he's going into the unknown, he's going into uncertainty. And he makes a decision, he makes a vow that he's going to do that. He's going to commit himself to not turning back towards the Jade Gates until he's received the teachings and completed his quest. So a very, very powerful kind of statement of intent and commitment. Yeah, this kind of a real kind of poignant moment where he's just faced with the decision to go beyond those Jade Gates, or to turn back to safety. And each of us faces those kind of moments in our lives, those kind of what you could call Jade Gate moments, when we've got the Jade Gates in front of us, and it's kind of the boundary of our familiar life, our comfortable life. Behind us is what we know, it's who we are, the things that, our habits, the kind of person we are now, the kind of things that we do, even though we know they might not make us happy, they kind of might be causing us harm. We want to, we're kind of drawn to go back towards what's comfortable, what we know. And beyond us, in front of us, lies uncertainty, actually lies change. And that moment of stepping beyond the Jade Gate, stepping beyond the kind of comfort zone into a new situation, that's the kind of moment we're faced with. All the time, actually. It could be in quite day-to-day ways. It's kind of, am I going to be a more generous person, or am I going to be a stingy person? It's that kind of, day-to-day level. Am I going to, basically, if I go on a retreat and put myself in a very different set of circumstances, I'm going to change, and I don't know what the outcome's going to be like. So there's quite day-to-day kind of moments where we leave behind the familiar or what's comfortable. We just kind of step outside of our comfort zone to try new habits or to try new things. It can be quite day-to-day examples, but it can also be quite life-changing moments where all of a sudden we know we've got to make quite a big change. We've got to do something very different. So those Jade Gate moments can be quite life-changing. And for me, a moment, about 8 years ago now at Sangha Night, I was listening to Bodhinaga talking about Hsuan Tsang. Bodhinaga gave a talk about Hsuan Tsang and the pilgrimage and the journey of Hsuan Tsang. And yeah, I heard all about this episode with the Jade Gates and Hsuan Tsang's decision to step outside of his comfort zone into uncertainty and danger. And yeah, basically what arose for me was a desire to ask for ordination, to become an order member. It's just this desire, well, this is what I want. In a sense, this is what I want to do with my life. I want to serve this. I want to kind of serve something much bigger than me, and this is the most valuable thing that I could do with my life. So so I've got a lot to thank both the Danya and Hsuan Tsang for just the example of being able to do something really, really valuable with your life and meaningful with your life. And that could look very, very different for people in whatever walk of life people choose. But for me, that was a Jade Gate moment. That was me thinking, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to do with my life. So a big, you could say, one of the ways we could really be able to stick to our quest and not get blown around by the worldly winds is when we make a decision to become about something bigger than ourselves, actually. If we make a decision to serve something bigger than ourselves or become about something bigger than just yourself, well then in a way you then become part of something bigger. You're not just this kind of small kind of boat getting blown around by the wind. You become part of something much, much bigger. And there's a verse from the Buddha, from the Dhammapada, which illustrates this. Yeah, so the Buddha's talking about a wise person, and he says, as a solid rock cannot be shaken by the wind, so the wise person is unmoved by praise and blame. So, yeah, I suppose, you become a bigger, more solid, more stronger person when your life becomes about something bigger than the worldly winds. If your life's about people liking you or praise, or your life's about just getting as much pleasure as you can, well then your happiness is quite fragile actually, and you can be blown around by that. You can be blown around from place to place by these experiences, by whatever the world throws at you. But if your life is about something bigger than that, then you become actually much more substantial. You become more like a tree with roots connected into the earth, or a big solid mountain that can't be blown around. You become a big sizable being that can't be blown around. By taking that decision to serve something bigger than yourself. But a bit of a footnote, before I end, a bit of a footnote, which is just that we do need supportive conditions. And in fact, we can't do it without supportive conditions. I'm not Hsuan Tsang. Hsuan Tsang got help, and in the myths he was helped by Monkey and Pigsy and the various different characters that helped him along his journey. But we can't do it alone. We need supportive conditions. So a big part of Shraddha is to be inspired by other people. Actually, other people can reconnect us with what's most important to us, can remind us about what's most valuable to us. They can help us to listen, pay attention to that voice, that inner voice that knows what's right and what's best for us. So that's why we really emphasise and stress the importance of community, in a way, of like-minded people, of kind of meeting regularly and just being reminded of what your life could be about, what your life, what actually is valuable in life, what is important in life. That's why we stress supportive conditions. So, just to close, just by saying basically it's not enough to be inspired. It's great to be inspired and it's very important to be inspired, but it's not enough. The Buddhist journey is a journey of transformation. We need to act on our inspiration and transform ourselves in a way to make use of the riches that are on offer to us, because they're very potent and very powerful. So the spiritual life and the Buddhist life is a journey of transformation, and it's not enough to just like it and admire it. We need to act. And we need to be bold. And there's a quote by a mountaineer, which is very appropriate to end with, if I can find it. Yes, there's a mountaineer called W.H. Murray, and there's a quote, in a sense, about boldness, which I think is very appropriate. And so William Murray says, until one is committed, there's a quote about commitment as well, until one is committed, there's hesitancy, there's the chance to draw back. Always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. And that is, the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favour all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. And I learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power and magic in it. So be bold and dream big. Do what you can really do.